Prime Minister Keir Starmer had his first official meeting with the returning US President Donald Trump. All eyes were on the Oval Office to see whether Starmer would make progress on talks over Ukraine or Trump would throw in an explosive accusation or two. Now, we received lots of questions from you before that meeting took place. John Sharman asked, can Starmer come out of this meeting without losing face? Andrew, did he?
Short answer, yes. I think it's very important that we come on to the other hand, the howevers, the buts, and the neverthelesses in due course. But the basic story is that he had to come out of this meeting with signs that we were going to avoid American tariffs, and he's done that. The words are quite warm. We haven't got the details. This new UK-US trade agreement, which surprised everybody, is going to be a relatively limited one, and we need to see the details. But on that, thumbs up. He had to avoid being humiliated over the Chagos Islands deal. Many people, particularly on the right, assumed that Trump would just squash this and dismiss it and be quite caustic about it, and they were looking forward very much to that. And in fact, they got exactly the opposite from Trump. So a lot of work by the Foreign Office paying off there. And then finally, of course, the most important issue of all is Zelensky. Again, the words were better than we could have expected. He did not commit, of course, to American troops inside Ukraine or to Ukraine joining NATO. Nobody expected that. But he did use the word that Keir Starmer has been using now for days and weeks, backstop. And he made it clear that some kind of commercial deal. I have always thought to get Trump's people into Ukraine towards the east, near the front line, looking for minerals, digging for minerals, stuff that Trump now believes is his and America's, is a very, very effective tripwire. Putin does not want to kind of move his troops across stuff that Trump now thinks is effectively American. So I think on that, we've made very, very significant progress. I think he came out of it better than anyone can have expected. He can deserve to be very excited. He comes back to lots and lots of domestic problems about the economy, problems inside the cabinet on welfare and spending that we talk a lot about. But he comes back with enhanced authority as Prime Minister and a trip that has been meticulously prepared, from that envelope outside of the breast pocket handed over to Trump from the King and the rest of it. And I think he's had a very, very strong, very good 24 hours.
Despite the praise that's being heaped on Keir Starmer today in the press, there were clear disagreements, though, weren't there, Rachel? I mean, Freddie Hayward, our colleague who's out in Washington at the moment, wrote on newstatesman.com today that the failure to make progress on Ukraine was really a sign of the UK's weakness.
Yeah, Freddie's piece is really interesting because he kind of goes underneath some of those triumphant front pages that we saw this morning. And the key thing, as Andrew said there at the end, is what was the main point of this visit? The context was Ukraine and whether the US would contribute any kind of backstop to prevent further Russian aggression. And while the vibes between Starmer and Trump were certainly better than many expected and better than the language that Trump has used in the last week, there wasn't really any kind of concrete agreement. Trump said that he doesn't believe that Putin will violate his word after any peace deal. Maybe he hasn't been paying attention to Putin over the past couple of decades. And there is this idea that if America has an interest in Ukraine because of they're mining for rare earth minerals, then just the presence of US workers doing that mining is somehow equivalent to US troops or US military support, and they're not really equivalent. So if you take the main point of the meeting, can you get a guarantee from the US that it will take an interest again in European security? No, we didn't get that. We got lots of very warm words, but if that was the ambition, then it did fall short on that level. Although I think the other stuff is obviously very important too. And I think the point about this meeting was there are so many risks, so many landmines, so many potential ways in which Starmer could seem humiliated or caught off guard. So to have managed to make it through the meeting without any of that happening, that is in itself a success.
But there was also an interjection from JD Vance, the Vice President, at one point, wasn't there? about the UK's free speech, this idea that he raised a couple of weeks back. Rachel, what did you make of that?
Yeah, JD Vance pushed about free speech, claiming that sort of Britain didn't have free speech. It's a very sort of Elon Musk, JD Vance talking point. And actually Starmer did correct him and say that he was very proud of the UK's record on free speech. It wasn't quite as gracefully done, I don't think, as when Emmanuel Macron sort of put his hand on Trump and corrected him about whether European nations that have given aid to Ukraine were sort of getting that money back. So the intervention and the correction wasn't done with quite as much charm and style, but Starmer did counter JD Vance, who didn't look all that happy about it, to be honest.
I also thought that Freddie's piece was a really, really interesting one, and one of the best written, as it were, counter-narrative pieces we've seen so far. But I do think that we have to be realistic. The idea that Keir Starmer could come in speaking for all of Europe, speaking for Ukraine, and get an explicit promise of American troops on the ground, or indeed that Zelensky would be at the top table, was always going to be unlikely and, frankly, I think fanciful. I think what he has got is the warm words are important. I mean, the fact that Trump mentioned Article 5 and mentioned NATO, I think reassured an awful lot of diplomatic observers around Europe and around Britain. They didn't expect that. And I think the feeling that I had, frankly, a week ago, that perhaps this was America walking away fundamentally from Europe for all time, is overcooked. The story is going to be more complicated and, from our point of view, a little bit more reassuring than that. The real danger, I guess, is that European countries, including perhaps Britain, now think, oh, well, it's all right after all. Trump isn't going to go entirely away, so we don't need to worry about defence spending. That is exactly the wrong message to take away from this.
Just going back to our listener questions, S-Fire asked us, is Starmer going to position himself as the man negotiating for Europe, despite the fact that the UK is no longer in the EU? Andrew, do you think he made more of an impact than French President Emmanuel Macron did, who was in the White House earlier in the week?
Well, he's certainly a very, very important bridge, and that's been clear. The fact that he came straight back from the Washington meeting and is assembling and talking to an awful lot of European leaders in Europe on Sunday, in London on Sunday, shows that he sees himself as an interlocutor. In other words, he wants to bring the message back from those private conversations we haven't seen and heard about with Trump to Friedrich Merz of Germany, to Emmanuel Macron, and to the other European leaders. And that's the kind of thing that Britain used to do inside the EU. It's really, really interesting that after Brexit, after leaving the EU, we have been able to have that kind of relationship again. And the person entirely responsible for that, frankly, is Vladimir Putin. It's because the entire European continent feels under such pressure and under such threat that has given the possibility of a new kind of relationship between the UK and the EU. It won't be going back into the single market of the customs union, but it will be a quite ambitious defence and security arrangement of a kind that we would not have dreamed of a few years ago.
Another question, this time from Chirag. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. They ask, what does Starmer have left to trade for tariff-free access, which is what the UK obviously wants? Ukrainian freedom, they say, chlorinating chicken. And really, Rachel, this is getting to the point that Trump is a transactional president, but really, when you boil it down, the UK has really very little to trade.
It is valid to say, if we're looking at trade negotiations between these two partners, which one has more leverage, which one can really make the other one sort of come to where they are. Like the US has always been a sort of outsized partner for Britain. That is true, though, regardless of who the president and the prime minister were. I mean, the conversations about the US companies wanting access to, say, the NHS and British healthcare, or wanting to be able to flood the UK market with their agricultural products, and yes, chlorinated chicken. That's not really a debate about Trump. That's a debate about kind of America and Britain having actually quite different interests in a lot of these spaces. So I don't think anyone is expecting a kind of comprehensive trade deal covering everything. It's more about sort of sector-specific deals, things like advanced tech. And again, if you take the characters out of that negotiation, it's the same themes, it's the same trade trends that we saw when it was Barack Obama or David Cameron, when Theresa May was around to Joe Biden. Like, there is a reason that kind of comprehensive US-UK trade deal is always out of reach, and that's not really to do with the personalities involved. There is a legitimate question, though, about if Starmer wants more from Trump at any point. I mean, we've got 4 years of this. They've offered the state visit already. We've already said that we're going to increase our defence spending, not to the level that Trump would like us to increase our defence spending, but we sped up the timetable of that quite significantly. So I think there is a question of if there are further diplomatic issues on which the US would like, the UK would like America on side, it's difficult to see where our leverage is.
Yeah, no, I agree absolutely with a lot of that. It's very important to say, when people talk about chlorinated chicken, it's not going to be that kind of trade deal. It's a very specific deal around AI and advanced technology. And interesting, this will be controversial. Britain being outside the EU for a more liberal, less regulated approach to AI. And there are plenty of people inside the industry as well as outside who are nervous about that. But nonetheless, that is one of those things that, as it were, Starmer is bringing to the table, not just for Donald Trump, but for his not best friend, Elon Musk, as well.
Another question we had was from RP1692, who asked, does Team Starmer have a backup plan in case the attempt to stay friendly with what he calls America's fascist leadership doesn't work out? And I think this is getting to the point that Freddie makes in his piece, where he says, while it's possible to stay friendly with Trump through flattery, invitations from the king, what have you, is that really going to work in the future when the Republican Party might have J.D. Vance as its leader or whoever else?
Well, I think what's really important about that is not to think that this is going to be something. I think you can sit out Trump. Trump's not going to be there forever, but you can't sit out Trumpism or MAGAism. That might be there for a very long time to come. And therefore, the possibility that we might need to do a much more radical turn towards Europe is still open, is still out there. This is not the moment for it, but it might be there as well. I think the other really important thing after this weekend to note is that because Starmer comes back in a more powerful position as Prime Minister, we are now going to see a series of extremely controversial arguments inside the Labour Party about things like welfare, immigration, law and order. In other words, this rougher, harder blue Labour edge that he's brought to the government is going to carry on and is going to be controversial throughout the spring.